about hay fever. And that is because it's certainly going to be an issue for many of us very soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, let me just talk about this now so that we can be ready. Some people are already suffering from symptoms of hay fever and they're uncomfortable. So they're dealing with COVID issues and they're dealing with hay fever and they're like, oh, I can't even see my doctor. This is terrible. So I wanted to just talk about this so we can at least decrease some of our discomfort during this difficult time. So, of course, we know that hay fever is something that presents as itchy eyes, runny eyes, itchy throat, sneezing, headache, just real discomfort. And I've seen horrible cases of hay fever where the eyes were so swollen that you thought they were going to fall out of the socket. There was just so much swelling. It's more discomfort than anything else. It rarely leads to any serious complications, but it makes life very uncomfortable. And so what causes these symptoms? Well, it is exposure to pollen. Pollen that your body is not responding to well. So again, it involves the immune system. And the issue is your immune system is seeing these pollen from trees, ragweed, grass, different flowers, and they're seeing this as foreign. So they begin to overreact. You know, these pollen, they come to the mucous membranes and they enter through that path. And when these cells, you'll see this slide often, Pastor, because I like to get to the real etiology of what's going on. I want us to really understand our bodies, how they work, how they respond, because we have a better appreciation of how to treat our bodies and how to help it work better. So we have to always go back to the immune system. It's not just important for COVID-19, but the immune system is also important when dealing with something as common as hay fever. When that pollen gets past the mucous membrane of your nose or your eyes, it is presented to these cells here, the eosinophils and the mast cells. And these guys go crazy. They see these pollen as dangerous, which they're not, but they see them as dangerous, and they begin to spew chemicals, histamine, and they begin to dilate blood vessels. So you get more swelling in the eyes, the throat, the lungs, the mouth. And these are the culprits when it comes to a really bad reaction with hay fever. Now, how do you treat these things? What do you do when you have this kind of disruption in your life? Well, first you want to avoid the irritant, and the irritant is really the pollen from the trees, the plants, the ragweed that's growing around. And so you want to know, when is it the most outside? Well, the morning time between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. is when you have your highest burden of pollen outside. So if you have to go and garden, or if you want to take your daily walk, don't do it during this time if your body doesn't respond well to the pollen. Do it after 10. Do it in the afternoon when there's less pollen burden. Also, when it rains, it really decreases the amount of pollen in the ear. So that's a great time to go outside. After it rains, go outside, walk around. You will be surprised how decreased a reaction you have to pollen. Wear long sleeves so that when you come inside, long sleeves and long pants, when you come inside the house, you can take them off, throw them in the chute, and go and take a shower and wash the pollen off of your body. This is hydrotherapy in practice. You're washing the pollen off. If you can wash your hair, do that. Wash your face well, wash your entire body, get the pollen off of you, and that will really help. Also, wash your nasal passages. How do you wash your nasal passages? Well, you can irrigate with water, salt and water. And there are these things called neti pots, or there are these little bottles that most pediatricians have. My PD gave me a lot of bottles. There were samples. They're in the pharmacy. you can put just some salt and water in there and squirt up one nostril and allow it to run down the other nostril. So that's an excellent way to decrease your response to pollen. You're hitting it at the source. Your mucous membranes is where the pollen is in presenting to the white cells. So you want to wash them away quickly so that your white cells don't come and grab them up and act crazy. So irrigation, every time you go outside and come back in, irrigate your nasal sinuses with salt and water. We spoke about it last week during our hydrotherapy discussion that a hot foot bath can really help decrease congestion in the sinuses. I suffered with hay fever in my younger days, and surprisingly it affects teens and folks in their 20s more than anybody else. So when I was in my 20s and when I was in residency, I had bad hay fever. I remember I was so congested, and so a hot foot bath certainly can help decrease that congestion. Back then, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about hydrotherapy. All I knew was, pills. And I took all these pills and I still was so stuffy. They weren't working. So it's always good to know about adjuvant therapies. And a hot foot bath is a good one. Remember, we said last time you would get a tub of hot water that goes above your ankles, put your feet in there and sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, and that can really help to drain congested areas in the nasal area and even in the chest area and the abdomen. Steam inhalation, I've done this personally. I've had my children do this, and it helps. It really does help. That moist heat goes up into the sinuses and helps to really break up the mucus and to empty it out. And you can add eucalyptus to that and thyme. They both work well with decreasing mucus and inflammation. I have some thyme in my backyard right now. So thyme is already popping up. Thyme is perennial. So when you plant your thyme in your backyard or in your window, it pops up every year. It's an easy herb to grow. And so in my backyard now, I have tons of thyme. So all you have to do is just pick, a handful, put it in some boiling water and inhale that steam. So it's
So,
good to
Doc,
have. Yes,
I'm
yes,
just
Pastor.
curious, how do you tell the difference between sinusitis or just sinus issues and hay fever?
Yeah, sure. So the terms are very close. So when we talk about issues with the sinuses, it can be affected by multiple things. Now, if you have a sinus infection, oh boy, that is painful. You would have things like fever, because it's a bacterial infection usually. You'd have fever, you'd have terrible headache, and you'd have very thick, gunky, yucky stuff coming out of your nose. So that's a sinus infection. Um, if you have if the etiology of the cause is from, let's say, pollen that causes hay fever, you get more of a runny discharge. Nothing thick, nothing heavy, but this constant drainage, this thin drainage. If it's the common cold, which is from a virus, then you would first start with a a thin drainage but that will be followed by something more thick and heavy. And with a common cold, that should resolve in about 5 to 10 days. With hay fever, it's going on for weeks and months. You're just constantly blowing and it's draining. So the duration can also help. So it depends on what the etiology is. And if it's bacterial, pain, um, heaviness, and fever. With hay fever, you don't have fever. Even though it's called hay fever, you don't have a real fever response.
So is there a reason it attacks younger people or it modifies itself? It presents itself in younger people in opposition to anybody else?
That's an excellent question. We don't know that. So there are some things we don't have the perfect answer to. And for
Mhm.
that, we don't know. Why does it affect individuals at a younger age? Certainly older folks can get it too, but it's more prevalent in individuals, teens to 20s, and we're not exactly sure why.
And then as they get older, it just goes away, or in some instances, with
Yes, sometimes as you get older, you can have a better response to the pollen. Your white cells aren't going crazy every time they see this pollen. So it can improve. Certainly, it can improve with age. And that was my case, and I've seen it in other individuals too. Definitely, definitely.
But for the most part, when we're talking about hay fever, we're talking about monitoring, managing how it impacts us, I guess. Since
You know what? That's how we usually address it from a medical standpoint. But in the next slide, I'm going to tell you ways that you can eradicate it, which we
mm,
don't often get a chance to talk about in the doctor's office. All right. So that's
mm,
an excellent question. So, apart from the steep inhalation, we can also have one room that's dedicated as an air filtered room. So in that room, you would have, if you can have an air filter to purify the air, because when you really get stuffy and congested with hay fever, it is extremely uncomfortable. And those who suffer from it totally understand what I'm saying. Another thing is, do not hang your sheets outside. It's nice to be all natural and get everything drying outside naturally, but pollen gravitates to sheets. And if you have an issue with hay fever, you don't want to hang your sheets outside, bring them inside, put them on the bed and sleep on them. You're going to be so uncomfortable. If you don't have an issue with hay fever, go ahead, hang your sheets outside. But that's for folks who have an intolerance to pollen. They don't handle pollen exposure well. So back to your question, is it just treating the symptoms, or is there anything that we can actually do to help um, maybe get rid of this very uncomfortable issue? Well, believe it or not, moving to a plant-based diet, not just a plant-based diet, but a whole food plant-based diet, eating your food as naturally as it comes from the ground or from the tree or the vine, is a way to really help your immune system be ready for these pollen. This kind of diet is much lower in toxins, in substances that suppress your immune system. This diet helps your blood to flow through your vessels much more freely and get to areas that will fight the pollen attack. So a whole food plant-based diet does help decrease your response to these pollen. Also, vitamin C. We've spoken about vitamin C in the before, and we've learned that it is an antioxidant which binds up free radicals. It helps to boost the potential of white cells, and it can help decrease the response to pollen so that you don't have this exaggerated response. It can really help the symptoms of hay fever. So usually you cannot overdose on vitamin C. It's really hard because it's water soluble. So you just pee it out if you take too much. But if you take, I don't know, 500 milligrams a day, 1,000 milligrams a day, you know, a reasonable amount to help keep your levels up, that would be fine, especially during pollen season. Vitamin B complex. Yes, yes, go ahead.
so you use the term whole foods. What does that
Yes.
term whole mean?
Yes, yes. So whole means not fragmented, not altered, not processed, and not refined. So I like to go back to my sweet potato. I love sweet potatoes. I think they're the perfect food. If you take a sweet potato, you go to the store, you buy a sweet potato. The way to enjoy that whole is to just, wash off the dirt of her skin, and you can put her in the oven and bake her and eat her. She's whole. You haven't, put her through any terrible processing. If she went to the factory, and she would have had her fiber denatured, she'd have had oil and salt added to her. She'd look like a little thin slice of a chip. So a potato chip is not a whole food. A sweet potato in its natural looking the way it did coming out the ground is a whole food. Any food that you have to open up a bag is usually not a whole food. So like your chips, your crackers, they are not whole. They have had things removed and things added to them. They've had their fiber removed, salt and sugar and oil added. They're no longer whole. Does that
Thank
make
you.
sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes, and we're going to repeat that over and over and over again for weeks and months and years, because it takes time to really understand what does that mean, because that's not how we eat normally. And so it takes a whole mind shift to really understand, okay, this is whole food. This is what I need to eat to help support my immune system, to help fight disease. So we'll repeat it often because it took me years to understand. And once I understood and made the changes, the results have just been life changing. And I want every listener to understand that. And we'll work with you over time to make sure you feel comfortable with a whole food plant-based diet. All right. So thank you for asking that. So increase your vitamin C, increase your vitamin B complex when you're trying to help with your hay fever symptoms. Vitamin B complexes increase interferon production, which is a part of the initial response to fighting foreign things. So it does help you with your response to hay fever. Stinging nettle, that's a natural herb that has been found to really help with allergy type symptoms. So, I often tell folks they can try stinging nettle. It's fairly safe and it can be taken to help decrease the symptoms, but that should not be your primary go-to. I want you not to look to herbs as the treatment for your ailments. Change the lifestyle first. Ascertain the cause. What's the cause? And then see how you can change your lifestyle to treat the illness. So the cause is your body's poor response to pollen. How can I support my immune system so it responds to pollen better? While you're doing that, you avoid too much pollen. So you don't go outside when it's early morning, when the pollen is highest. You don't go outside when the grass has just been cut. When the grass is just freshly cut, the grass sends off its own pollen and you will have a hard time breathing and you'll be sneezing continually. Use hydrotherapy. Make those changes while you're trying things like stinging nettle or boswellia or these other herbal interventions, okay? One that's also very powerful, I don't know if you've heard of this one, Pastor, but it's very powerful. Taking local raw honey. Have you heard of that one?
I mean, you mean, I don't know, taking it for the purposes of the hay fever, you mean? Or you mean just
Yes,
eating?
yes, yes.
No, I'm no fever expert.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad to introduce this one to you because it is so powerful. Local, and when I say local, I mean within your region. So within, let's say, the closest possible to where you reside. So within your town, or maybe one or two towns over. But you don't want to get honey from, Australia to treat your hay fever here in your state. The reason I say local is because the bees, they're exposing themselves, of course, to pollen all the time. And so in the honey are some remnants, some exposure of pollen in there. When you take honey on a regular basis prior to the pollen season, you are slowly inoculating yourself with the pollen. And you're allowing your white cells to see this and to not have this bizarre response when they have a big pollen exposure. So it's almost like minute doses of vaccination every single day. And it really does work. A neighbor of mine, he suffered for years with horrible hay fever. He could never go outside. And he wanted to start a business where he could do landscaping. And so I told him, listen, go down, the road, get some local honey, take 2 tablespoons every single day. Every single day, take that. He followed my advice. He took it every day through the winter. And when spring came, he was like, oh, wow, I'm not having my typical sneezing and congestion. And he could go about his business, mowing people's lawns, doing his landscaping, and he is not in discomfort. And this is just a simple intervention to help to treat hay fever. So, and it works. I've seen it work on countless occasions. It worked in my little son, who his eyes would be bulging out because, of the pollen. I gave him a a teaspoon of local honey every day with his tea or added it to his porridge, and it helped him for the following spring. So that's an effective way to really slash the your response to pollen.
Remember,
Juicing,
yeah, I
yes,
remember listening to, I don't know if you heard about Dr. Swaby. He was a natural remedy doctor.
yes, yes, yes,
And
yes,
one of his push was you always eat foods in season
yes,
from your locale, because
yes,
he felt that, according to his research, that whenever you eat food out of your locale, that you
yes,
nearly always had allergies. But if you
yes,
stick with foods in your locale, then you didn't have this problem with the problems with allergies that you're talking
yes,
about. So I see a little
yes,
connection there with what you're saying with the
yes,
honey and what
yes.
Dr. Swaby used to say.
Yes, yes, definitely. You're getting that exposure to the pollen just slowly every single day so that when the pollen season comes, it's like, oh, I've seen you before, no problem, no hay fever, no big reaction. It works. Let's say right now you're struggling with horrible symptoms. Your eyes are tearing up and your throat is itchy and you're so uncomfortable. You didn't start the local honey yet and you want to know what can you do now to help the symptoms. Juicing is very effective. If you start to replace a meal with juicing, in a few days, you will see significant improvement in your allergy symptoms. So when I say juicing, I mean get your carrots, your beets, your apples, your cabbage, put them through your juicer and drink a whole glass, at least 1 8-ounce glass every day. If you can do it, 2 8-ounce glasses, even better. You're getting a concentrated amount of your antioxidants, your vitamins, and your anti-inflammatories. And that will also help you decrease your reaction. So juicing, but also changing up your diet, making your diet more vegetables, more fruits, more nuts and grains, removing the dairy, remove the dairy. That's very high in mucus producing agents. Remove the dairy, increase your plant foods and juice for at least one meal a day, ideally your third meal. Just remove dinner and have your own juices, and that will really help with your allergy symptoms.
So I noticed that you're emphasizing removing the meal. So you can't add a juice to your meal. You need to replace one.
Well, as we talk together over the next few weeks and months, we'll get into the best eating pattern for your immune system. And really, the best way to eat is to have a big breakfast, a medium-sized lunch, and a very small dinner. Now, the 8-ounce juice is a nice small dinner. If you need to add another piece of something with it, I don't know if you're, starving and you want to add I don't know, a piece of apple or something light, go ahead. But you should not be having a big dinner meal and a juice, because a big dinner meal is not ideal anyway for the immune system. So your dinner should always be really small, pequeño, pequeñito, really small. And then if you can replace it, great. If you feel like you want to have a small dinner and your juice, that's fine. But dinner should always be super, super small, like a pauper, like you're poor small.
So isn't there an advantage to having the juice early in the morning in opposition to the end of the day, or are there any advantages or disadvantages to that?
Okay, so if everybody's schedule is different and
Mhm.
maybe someone doesn't have the time to have a big breakfast, which would be, the best, but you work with where you are. If you'd rather have your juice in the morning, that's totally fine. But then your biggest meal should be lunch, and dinner should still be really small. Why? Because you're going to sleep in a few hours and you cannot afford to tax your stomach, your GI tract, with all this work while you're trying to rest. And rest is super important for the immune system. So whatever you do, 3 to 4 hours before bedtime, you should be not be having any substantial meal. So that's why the juice is better at night. But if you want in the morning, there's no wrong answer. That's not wrong. But at least get in the 8 ounces once a day, and it can certainly replace a meal. All right. So something that most folks might not know is if you have really bad ragweed allergies, there are certain foods that are in the same family of ragweed that could really make your symptoms worse. So you want to avoid them. Those would be cantaloupe. You know, cantaloupes are great, they're awesome, but if you have a ragweed allergy, it may not be wise for you because it has similar features. It's from the same family. Mango, watermelon during pollen season may not be best. Um, that may be really painful for some to hear because mangoes are my heaven. I love mangoes, but thank God my body does not have a horrible response to pollen, so I do not have hay fever anymore. But if you do have it, you want to avoid mango during pollen season. All right,
So,
and
Doc, I don't know if you
yes,
need to run over that again. I missed
yes.
it somehow because I don't know about scrapping the mangoes from the diet, but
No, no, let me get this straight. I'm not saying scrap mangoes. Please, please, please. Mangoes are one of God's, greatest gifts to mankind. So I'm not saying scrap mangoes. But if you have hay fever, now people who have hay fever know that they are completely and terribly uncomfortable. They hate the feeling. So they will be okay skipping the mangoes during pollen season because they just hate those eyes and the nose, they hate feeling that way. So those people, only those people, not everybody else, no, the rest of us, we can eat our mangoes.
no, what I was trying to get to was the reason anyhow, these foods that we skip, the reasons why
Oh,
they
I see,
impact
I see.
hay fever.
They are cousins, they're in the family, they are related to the ragweed family. So if ragweed is your trigger, and you may have different triggers. There are other triggers for allergies. There's not only ragweed, but if you realize that ragweed is your trigger, you may want to skip these foods while you're trying to get your body ready to face the pollen better. And remember, if you make the right changes over time, you may not have that issue with hay fever next year. So really start making those changes now, and you'll have a better spring, and hopefully next year a wonderful spring, and you can eat your mangoes.
I'm just curious. Let's say, for example, ragweed is my trigger. How would I know what foods are associated with ragweed?
Yeah,
Where would
sure.
I find that kind of information? Or
Sure. So if you want to go all the way and get tested, let's say for what your trigger is, an allergist can do skin testing, and they'll give you a long list of what your triggers are. And if somebody's a horrible sufferer, that may be very helpful for you. So you can consider that. Let's say you don't want to do all that. These foods that I put here are the more common ones that have the ragweed familiarity or association. So you just want to skip those three at least and see. And don't forget, there's hope in sight. You don't have to be a hay fever sufferer forever. Make the changes that we spoke about, and you will have a better response by God's grace to the pollen each season.
yeah, I know I have one of my kids.
Yes.
They've been tested and they said they're allergic to everything. That was their response to me.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm
it
allergic
feels
to
like that
everything.
sometimes.
So
It feels like that sometimes. But don't forget, when you talk about allergy, you're talking about the immune system's response to an allergen. How is your immune system responding to things that it's seeing every day? If you can work with your immune system and get it in tip-top shape, many of these allergies will subside.